This is the first of 3 videos on punctuation. In this video, I will focus it on sentences, quotes, and titles. So we will discuss different types of sentences and what kind of punctuation to use at the end of them. Second, we will discuss when and how to use quotation marks, including using quotation marks with titles. And then at the very end, I will share a good resource that you can use when you are capitalizing words in titles. And they could be any title. It could be a title that you write yourself. So there are 4 different types of sentences. You could have general statements, and general statements always end in a period. Some examples. The dog would like to go for a walk. It is nice outside. There are a lot of people walking on the path. You could also give an order. Something to note about this, since this video does mention quotation marks, is an order does not need quotation marks around it. Now, if somebody said, right, if there was dialogue happening, maybe we're talking about reading a story and characters are ordering each other around. She said, "Go home," but he wouldn't listen. Then there are words being exchanged between people. And if that happens, then you can use quotation marks. But an order does not need quotation marks. Probably the easiest example I can share with you is the stop sign. A lot of people have seen a stop sign. Stop signs don't have quotation marks around them. And when you read the stop sign, it says stop. That's giving you an order. And if you were to write that on a piece of paper, if you were to write that out, you could just say stop and put a period at the end. Or if you really wanted someone to stop, then you could say stop with an exclamation mark. And if you remember earlier in this video series, I talked about interjections, and I explained how a lot of times interjections have exclamation marks at the end, but they don't always have to have exclamation marks at the end. That was something that I mentioned at the very end of the video. I'm just showing this because stop would be an interjection. Anyway, orders, they don't have to be interjections, right? So we have 3 examples of orders that are not interjections, and the first example has a period at the end, and the next 2 examples express varying degrees of emotion. So let me just read them out. Please take the dog for a walk. Take the dog outside now. Get out of my way! So you can see how in the first example, this order is being given very nicely, very politely, right? Please do this, right? In the second order, take the dog outside now. There's almost this panic happening. I mean, maybe the dog really needs to go outside to go to the bathroom, right? Maybe, who knows? And then this last one, get out of my way. The person is upset and angry, in this example anyways. I mean, you could say, please move out of the way, and that would be polite, and then you wouldn't need an exclamation mark at the end. Okay, so we've looked at 2 so far. We've looked at general statements that always have periods, and we've looked at orders, and depending on how strong that order is, you might have a different kind of punctuation at the end, either a period or an exclamation mark. The next 2 are questions. So, and then strong emotions. We'll get into strong emotions next, but a question always has a question mark at the end. And I want to share these 3 examples because you could have a question word that will give you a hint, right? A question word like where or who or even when will let you know that there's a question being asked. But you don't always have to have that question word. Let me read these examples. Where is the dog? The dog is outside, right? Who wants to go for a walk with me? So where is the dog? That's obviously a question. But something to know here is that the second example, the dog is outside, right? That's also a question. Let me just read it again. The dog is outside, right? So you see how I raised my voice at the end? So that's how you can use your voice to express a question. But when you're just reading it, you have to be very careful, right? If you're adding the right punctuation to the end of a sentence, you have to think about what you're reading, and one tip is to try reading it out loud, and then you might catch little things like that. Okay, so strong emotions can also be expressed, and these sentences end in an exclamation mark. Earlier in this video series, I talked about interjections. Interjections often have exclamation marks at the end, but they don't always, as I explained at the very end of that video. And strong emotions do not always have to be interjections. Okay? But I have some examples that have interjections in them, the first and last one, and then I have an example that has no interjections in it, right? So, help! I lost my dog! So that word help, that's an interjection. And I lost my dog, that's a really short phrase. We could call that an interjection if we wanted to, but we don't have to, because it is actually a full sentence that has an exclamation mark at the end. Next example, the dog just ate my homework. So that's definitely not an interjection. That's a sentence to explain what happened, but the person explaining it is really upset. Here's an example that has an interjection at the beginning and then a sentence right after. Terrible! I would never go outside in that weather. Okay, so we just went through the other two sentence types, questions and expressing strong emotions, which could be interjections, but they could also be just statements that we're sharing, but those statements are expressing a strong emotion that we feel. Like just how terrible the weather is, for example. Okay, the second part of the video, we will talk about quotation marks. So just to warn you, there will be 4 different ways of using quotation marks. I'd just like to go through one way at a time. So the first way, we're looking at dialogue. Earlier in this video, I mentioned reading a story and having characters talk to each other. When people talk to each other, that's called dialogue. Example, Sheila asked, "When will dinner be ready?" So when you have dialogue, there's a couple things that are important. You'll always need some kind of word to explain that somebody is speaking. Like this word asked here, right? Sheila asked, comma. You notice you always put a comma after that word. And then you put quotation marks around whatever it is that she asked. And maybe she said something instead, but this time she asked, so we have a question mark, right? So notice, quotation mark, when will dinner be ready? Question mark, quotation mark. When we have dialogue, everything that is said in that dialogue has quotation marks around it, including the punctuation at the end. Important to remember there. So as I said, dialogue, when someone speaks, usually happens in a story. You can look for words like this. Now, I'm just sharing different tenses that you might see, and also different ways of using these verbs, because different characters, we could have, for example, asked in the past tense, asks or ask, right? She asks or I ask, right? There'd be a different way of using it. We're looking for, say, said, says, say, question, questions, question, spoke, speaks, speak, right? He speaks and says, right? Something like that. So you're imagining that people are actually talking with each other. Okay, let's look at an example where a title has quotation marks around it. Now, I'm going to add to this after some very important information that I'll be adding, so just let me read this example first. You should read The Secret Garden because it is a great story. So you can see here that there are quotation marks around the title of the story, The Secret Garden. Now, something to know is that nowadays most titles are italicized, see the slanted words, instead of putting quotation marks around them. However, it is still correct to use quotation marks, especially if you are writing by hand, as it is hard to write in italics that way. Titles are just what you think, and these are just some examples, it's not everything. Maybe newspaper headlines, movie titles, song titles. I read the headline, "Local Boy Wins National Championship," and I wondered if I knew the person. So you can see that "Local Boy Wins National Championship," the headline, has quotation marks around it. Our movie title example, a new movie called Passengers just came out in theaters. Or a song title, Michael Jackson's song, Billie Jean, is still popular. Okay, the third way is when we have slang. I have a few pointers about slang because it's not really something that you should use that often, especially in your writing. But let me read this example first. The new drama series always gives me the feels. And you can see that the word feels is in quotation marks. And see that period is outside of the quotation marks, and that's because we do not have dialogue here. All we need to do is put quotation marks around that word that is slang. Okay? So it can be tricky to know when someone is using a slang word, especially if you haven't heard it before. You can think of it, here's a few ways to think about slang. If someone is explaining something and they are using words that you know have been made up, then that is slang, right? In this example, feels, if something gives you the feels, it's like saying that something made you feel really emotional. Maybe it made you sad or upset, right? For example, or maybe it just really made you think about your feelings. Slang gets created in certain communities or groups. Slang can be offensive too, so be careful if you're using it. Now, if you're listening to this video and you think, oh yes, I can think of some slang right now, then you definitely understand what slang is. I don't want to share slang terms in this video that are offensive, obviously. So you should not use slang in your writing unless you are explaining what a slang word means. If you are explaining what someone else said, or if you are writing a story and a character speaks in a certain way, right? Obviously, I had to use a slang word for my example here, right? I think it's a good example. So slang is only meant for informal conversations. So it would be conversations that you might have with friends. It wouldn't be something that you would write in a business letter, for example. Last way of using quotation marks would be with a direct quote. Let me just read this example, and it should make some sense. My friend always told me that you can't worry about things that you have no control over. So you notice that there are quotation marks around the words that this friend said. The exact words that the friend said have quotation marks around them. And only those words need quotation marks, right? And you notice how the punctuation, the period, is not inside the quotation marks. So again, the only time that you need to put your punctuation inside the quotation marks is if you have dialogue, which was the first example that I went through. So you use quotation marks with direct quotes. Here, quotation marks are being used to quote the exact words that someone said. Direct quotes can come from people you've talked to, something you have read, something you have heard, anything like that. And they're the exact words. Okay, the last part here will be pretty quick. I just wanted to share this resource with you. And when you get the notes to go with this video in the spelling and grammar section of my website, you can click on this link for this site here. But if you're trying to write a title and you're not sure how to capitalize it, then you can go to this site, titlecapitalization.com. On this site, you can type in your title and see how to capitalize it. You can also click to see the rules. So on the next page, I'll have an example. Before I go through that, just remember a few things. You can type in any title that you like. As you type it in, it is automatically corrected. So what you'll see is just a screenshot of what I did, right? About how it shows how it was corrected after I typed it. So you don't need to worry about capitalizing anything, right? You just type and you put spaces in between the words. There are even links to click on if you aren't sure what coordinating conjunctions or prepositions are, for example. Let me just show you the picture here. So we can see here that I've in my search bar on the top, I've gone to titlecapitalization.com. And you can see the little explanation of the site, automatically capitalize your title. And I've selected the third option this third one here, do not capitalize words based on length. And I did that because this website uses the Chicago Manual of Style. So because it uses that manual, I suggest using that third option because you'll get the best answers that way. So I made up a title, Canada from East to West, an awesome country to visit. Maybe I'm writing a brochure or something. Okay, so there's a link that I've already clicked on to see the rules, and I thought I'd include that in these notes so you can see the rules for capitalization. Capitalize the first and the last word. 2, capitalize nouns, pronouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and subordinate conjunctions. Lowercase articles, a, and, the, coordinating conjunctions and prepositions. Lowercase the to in an infinitive. I want to play guitar. And then you can see that the Chicago Manual of Style is cited here, and that's important that no matter what you're doing, that your sources are always cited. So this website does a good job of citing its source of information. So you could click on the words coordinating conjunctions or prepositions here for more information on those parts of speech if you weren't sure what they were. So that's another thing that I like about this site is you don't need to have any prior knowledge about the parts of speech in order to type in your title and figure out how to capitalize it. But you can still see the words, you can still see the rules if you want to know them. Well, I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to the next one.